What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Gawa channel. I'm here today with a very special guest, Thomas Mahler, the CEO and game director of Moon Studios. Ori and the Blind
Hello.
Forest is a hello. Sorry about that. Ori and the Blind Forest was a huge success, critically acclaimed, loved by pretty much everybody. I
Oh,
just
thank you.
want I just want to ask you, how were you inspired, and how did you get into the industry? What inspired you to become a games designer?
So I always loved games, even as a child, right? Like I grew up playing games like Zelda on the NES, Super Mario Bros. 3, and then later on the Super Nintendo. Again, like games like Mario and Zelda and so on, right?
Definitely.
And RPGs mostly back then, and then it went over to Castlevania, Metroid, these kind of things, right? So I always loved games. And then, kind of like in my teenage years, I really got into level design for like back then games were like Unreal and Quake were really big, right? And they actually came out with their own level design tools, like back then the Quake Radiant or the Unreal Editor, right? And so I dabbled with that, but I was less interested at that point in level design, in 3D level design, which is basically what most of my job is today. And I was more interested in really trying to make beautiful models, right? Like just really cool looking character models and so on. So I really, for a couple of years, I was kind of like studying pretty much any 3D application out there, like 3ds Max, Maya, XSI, all these things, right? And at the same time, I started studying at school, like in Vienna, in Austria, Vienna. I went to a very traditional art school and studied traditional sculpture there. And yeah, that took me around 3 years. But that was a really good learning lesson in terms of just studying anatomy and generally studying how an artist should think, right? And yeah,
Because
from
I
there I
saw,
should. Sorry,
sorry,
go ahead.
I saw that you actually worked at Blizzard as a cinematic artist before you guys,
Yes.
before you created Moon Studios, and I
So
just,
here's
yeah.
here's here's how that happened. Let me just finish the story real quick. So in the like while I was studying, right, I was actually uploading my portfolio at some point, and I was always constantly like 2004 actually was that year where ZBrush released ZBrush 2 and it became its own thing. That was the first application where you could actually do digital sculpting, right? Like really sculpting on a computer with a Wacom pen. And I got really big into that and started making sculptures and so on, and then showed my portfolio online, and people really loved it. And one day I got two calls, like I was just in my living room, and got two calls. One was from Disney and one was from Blizzard, and they both asked me to go work for them.
Oh,
So I was like, oh my god, I love Blizzard. I want to go to Blizzard. And I love Disney as well, right? That was like one of the coolest days in my life.
yes,
Um,
top of the industry.
yes. So I said yes to Blizzard and kind of like flew over there and so on. And then I worked on StarCraft 2 for a while.
All right, yeah.
Um, but then while working at Blizzard, I really got um, into trying to make game prototypes and so on. That was the time when indie games started to become big, right? Like Braid and Castle Crashers and so on. These games in like 2008, these games made a huge splash, right? And really showed the entire industry that, hey, you could actually become successful and have a business, right? And actually make games again. Because I don't know if you remember, but like in the PlayStation 2 days, if you're a small indie developer, right, or just a person who wants to make games, there's no way. There was no way. Like dev kits cost back then like $100,000, right? You needed to be kind of like a known entity. Game development was super expensive at that point. I
Yeah,
mean, compared to now, it wasn't, right? But
the industry has definitely come a long way.
yeah, in terms of allowing indies in again, that's a huge deal. And honestly, that's why I was never that much of a fan of the game library on the PS2, GameCube, Xbox era, right? The original one, because it was just the games just became kind of like too big and there wasn't a lot of innovation anymore and so on. And I think that really changed with the Xbox 360. So anyway, after a couple of years, I really got into this whole thing of like trying to make my own gameplay prototypes. So while I was working at Blizzard, I was working there. I went home every day at like 10 or something, and then I was working till like 4 a.m. on my own games, right? And we just started at some point, like I just started to show that around to the likes of Electronic Arts and Microsoft. And just to make the story short, Microsoft was then the one that really wanted to work with us, right? And yeah, we kind of like already turned into that.
Yeah. So, speaking about Microsoft, how was it working with them during the process, the development of Ori and the Blind Forest?
Yeah. So here's the thing that is interesting. We obviously, like, we were developers, right, that worked at places like Blizzard before. So we weren't completely amateurs when we started Moon Studios. But we obviously also never worked directly in contact with a publisher, right? Like a lot of us just got, their assignments from our supervisors and then worked on that stuff, and that went into the game, and that's it, right? Like we worked at an office, but we never worked directly with that publisher. So, yeah, I think we were generally very concerned whether or not Microsoft would actually let us be creative, right? Or whether or not they would actually tell us, no, we don't like that level, change that level, it should be more like this. Or, oh, I don't like that story, change that story, we want it to be more like that, and so on. And it completely isn't like that. Like, it really, really isn't like that. Microsoft has been pretty damn great to us and has allowed us to just, I mean, they are to breathe and to just make the game that we really want to make, right? And they are just supportive. They're just trying to really say, look, here's our feedback, right? Take it or leave it, but here's what we think, and yeah, just do your own thing. And I think also we flew a little bit under the radar in general with Ori because nobody expected it to become as big and have as much of an effect as it had.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think there were that many people that really kept us in check, right? That were just like, yeah, these small guys are doing something there, but at the same time, we never got canceled or anything, right? Like there was never anything that was like, oh shit, we might be in trouble. And I think that's partly because our game always kind of like felt good, and there was always some interesting magic there. Like there was always magic in the air, and everybody kind of knew it, I think. But it was just a small project at Microsoft.
Yeah, I think everyone around the world knows that Ori is definitely a magical game. And
thank you.
To sort of talking about your team, why did you create Moon Studios in the first place? And I did hear the story that a lot of you guys are actually scattered all over the world.
Yeah, we are completely different in our approach to how most other studios work, and I don't actually understand why they are not just copying that idea, that approach right now. So look, while I was working at Blizzard, right, I saw kind of like how difficult it is to actually just hire the best talent out there, right? Like you always want to work with the most talented people and that just fit the job perfectly, right? But then whenever you have to relocate people to a certain office, for example, right, there's always this problem of, okay, hey, we really want to hire you, right? And you would think that if Blizzard calls you and tells you, hey, we want to give you a job, that everybody immediately goes, okay, when can I start, right? But that's actually absolutely not the case, right? Like once you have family and so on, it's like, there's lots of things coming in, like, hey, can I actually uproot my family? And so on, right? Like my kids just started in school. I can't just, leave and so on. So it's really difficult. It's really, really difficult for everybody in the industry to get the best talent together, right? So when I left Blizzard, the idea was, no, fuck that. We know a lot of artists and programmers and so on that are really proficient, that are really good. And if we could work together and form this dream team, right, then I have no doubt that we could make something amazing, right? Because we knew a lot of good talent. So we kind of approached Microsoft with that, right? And that was scary because it's kind of like this weird thing of like, hey guys, do you want to fund us, our small little studio that doesn't even have an office, right? And just has multiple people working across the globe. And that just doesn't sound very professional, right? but I think they liked our output and just gave it a chance. And so, yeah, I mean, right now we still have this DNA where we say, no, we're actually at Moon only hiring the absolute best talent across the world. And we had people now, applying from that worked at really big places on big projects. And we're like, sorry, dude, your stuff is not good enough. Because we really look for specifically that person that fits a certain job description and that really fits into the team, right? We also want to make sure that we don't hire any jerks, right? That it's actually fun to work with the guys from Moon, and yeah, that everybody is just insanely talented and pushes the other person, that everybody has this inspiring quality to them. So yeah, I mean, we have people from like 20 different countries now all working together. There is no like Moon Studios is a company from here or there. Moon Studios is just a global collaboration of really talented folks.
Perfect. Um, During the development of Ori and the Blind Forest, did you guys face or have any major challenges?
Uh, every day. We always like game development is really hard. Like you always start with, hey, we have this small little prototype or idea, right? And it already looks so good, and it's already so so nice because it's easy to get to a prototype that has potential.
Yeah.
And I think every developer then always makes that mistake of like, we can easily turn this into a shipped product. But really actually turning something into a shipped product that has the quality standard that millions of people can play it and not encounter bugs, and that they have a good experience and so on. And that it's really a fully formed experience. That's really difficult. That's a lot of work, and it's just really, really, really difficult. And I mean, on Ori, like even right now, as the CEO, and as kind of like a driving force behind design, I rarely get any weekends off. I'm working mostly like 14 to 16-hour days and so on. It's just really hard. It's a rough job, to do that. But it's also like even with that, right? I would still say I have the best job in the world, simply because it's super fun, and I love the products that we're making.
Yeah, the creativity. That leads me to my next question. What do you find, or what are your best and worst aspects of being in the video game industry?
I would say the worst aspects are that, well, first of all, the hours, right? Like, and I don't know exactly how to fix it. Like, I think generally for everyone of Moon, we try to keep it very civil. Like, we're not asking anybody to work like 12-hour days every day and so on, this kind of stuff, right? But it is difficult for me personally. For example, I don't know how I can change myself to not work every weekend, right? Or at least like, I mean, I even have multiple projects going on, that I kind of like work on the side and so on, and it's not very kind of like family uh, friendly to work
Yeah.
in an environment like that. But I mean, there's so many positives. Like I just love the work that I'm doing. I would do this kind of work, or exactly that kind of work, even if I wouldn't be paid, right, for what I'm doing. So it's just really a creative job I can do. Like the thing that I love about video games and about film, for example, is that it's a cumulative art form. So back then, for example, when I was making character models and 3D models for as a modeler for the industry, right, and then for Blizzard and so on, it becomes a bit monotonous to always kind of like just make models, right? But if you actually work in a smaller team, you will have to do everything. Like games and films, what I mean by they are cumulative art forms, it means that they're only really successful if multiple things work, right? Like if
All of it coming
the
together.
artwork has to work, the music has to work, right? The story has to work, all of that really, and the gameplay mechanics and so on, all of that has to come together and perform at a really high level, right? For the game to actually be good. And that's just super fun. And we have people like we just hired another person from Blizzard that came from Blizzard a year ago, who, when I was working at Blizzard, was also a really good friend of mine, who's also had this problem of like, hey, I'm actually just doing very technical work right now, and I'm not enjoying that as much anymore. And now here he's actually art directing and writing story and making paintings and making models and so on. And it's, you know, it's fun. It's like it's much more varied, and it's difficult to think of a job where you have that much variation and that much, you know, fun at your
Yeah, not
in
being
your daily
locked
place.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah. That let me. Have you got any advice, any words of advice for those who want to get into the game industry?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I get mails on a almost daily basis
Yeah.
from like students and so on, asking kind of like, "Hey, I really like your game. Do you have any advice for how I can break into the industry?" Um, I always kind of say the same thing. I would say at this point, there's kind of like two things to do, right? Like either you really want to make games, right? Then I would say, okay, make indie games. Like really start with looking at Unreal Engine or Unity. It's never been a better time to do that. These engines are free, right? You can just download them, sit down, go through the tutorials. The documentation now is great. Back then, when I started making 3D models, there was no documentation. Like you just the help file and that's it, right? So learning anything took forever back then. And now it's like, you have YouTube and so on. You can really look at how these engines work on by just watching someone on YouTube and so on. It's great. It's the best thing you could do. And just try to make an indie game. Try to make an indie game that you really finish, right? And that you try to get polished. Because everybody is similar to being an author or being a director. Everybody has a couple of really shitty pieces of work in him before he gets good, right? So you have to get through that and really get the shitty stuff out of you as soon as possible. Like at best when you're still studying, right?
Yeah,
And you
learn
really
from your mistakes.
and you do, right? Like yes, you always you make something and you're proud of it at the time, but it's actually really shit. And then you do it a couple of times, and then bam, at some point you have something where it's like, okay, this is actually competent now, you know. So that's for when you want to make games. If you want to make, if you want to be way more specialized, right, and really become a model and so on, then it's still the same thing. Just post your work online. Like really become good at what you're doing, and then post as much as possible online. I mean, we back then, for example, hired our animator James, who worked in the original Ori and the Blind Forest, simply because we saw some YouTube videos of his animations.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
So I see that you're someone very open and honest. You're out there with the community. I see you post on NeoGAF. Have you got any words for the gaming community?
Uh, well, I recently got into quite a bit of trouble, and I
Yeah.
always get into quite a bit of trouble for being open and honest. And because I always loved that, right? Like when I was younger and posting in forums and so on, I always loved it when a developer would actually sit down and like openly speak about here's how it is to work in the industry, right? But it never really happens because of NDAs and all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And but since we're indie, and I'm actually the CEO of a studio, I can be probably a little bit more open than if I'm just a dude who works at a place like Blizzard or any other place, because you're just like you don't want to give anything away and hurt the team, right?
Yeah.
So I just like that approach. At the same time, the thing that bothers me is that how very often kind of like journalists try to make sensationalist articles over a single post that you made, and then they're even changing contexts, right?
Yeah.
And so on. That kind of like annoys me because that is then the reason why you say, oh, I'm probably better off not posting anymore in communities, because I had that happen a couple of times now where some of the press even changed a couple of lines so that it looked more like a big thing that I said, and then it's kind of like an annoying thing, but that's what happens.
Yeah. All right. Well, I got to say I appreciate your honesty very much, and I have to say, Thomas, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I also want to give a shout out to everyone at Moon Studios. Thank you to everyone there for your amazing work. and I can't wait to see what comes next.
Thank you. I'm sure they appreciate the words.
Alright, thank you all for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or if you want to hear from some of your other favorite studios, let me know who in the comment section below. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button for more. I'm Gawa, see you all next time.